Well, welcome to part 2, and this is technical greenhouse gas accounting. So we look at methodologies and standards. So when talking about technical GHG accounting, so we cannot talk about that without talking about the greenhouse gas protocol. And this is basically a standard that provides a unified methodology for accounting for 7 greenhouse gases. So like I said, carbon is the one that's known most, but there are 6 others. So let's just have a sneak view of what is the GHG protocol. So I'm just going to search it. GHG protocol. Okay. Right, so this is a GHG protocol, and we've seen that it's a standard that provides a framework for the removal and accounting of 7 greenhouse gases. So here you see we set the standards to measure and manage emissions, companies and organizations, countries and cities. Standards and guidance, you have your tools and resources right here. You have e-learning, so basically learn how to use it. If I go right here, standards and guidance, I can see that, let me just hover, you can see that there's all standards and guidance, corporate standard, scope 2 guidance. Interesting, in our previous video we mentioned scope 1 emissions, scope 2 and scope 3 emissions as well. So here you see already there's scope 2 guidance, scope 3 guidance, scope 3 calculation guidance. You see scope 3 has, and we're going to talk about that because these are the hardest to measure. And I believe that's why there's actually 2 sections on it. And then there's land sector and removal standards, yada yada. Then tools and resources, we have, so if you have your tools and resources overview, your lifecycle databases, because remember it's too much. So there's a lot that goes into it. Calculation tools and guidance, frequently asked questions, and you can basically see all of these things. So if I look at lifecycle databases, for example, so for example, this is some of the things that you will need: calculation tools and guidance. Let me just go to learn more of the same. Yeah. And here you can find something. You can find this database, and all that. So we are not going to look at this in this class. So this is just for you to know that whatever we are going to be doing in Odoo, it's basically built not in a vacuum, but in relation to most of these things which are here. So if I go back to my slides, and you see here, basically the GHG protocol is a standard that provides a unified methodology for accounting for the 7 greenhouse gases. You have your carbon dioxide, your methane, nitrous oxide, HFCs, PFCs, sulfur hexafluoride, and nitrogen trifluoride. That's your chemistry. And so let's look at the 3 scopes of emission. We have scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So for scope 1, these emissions are what we call the direct emissions. So these are the emissions. Remember, in the previous video we were talking about the operational footprint, and you also have emissions from the entire value chain of a company. So you're talking about the company, the organization being in the middle, and then you have both upstream and downstream activities, which I already discussed in the previous class. So these scope 1 emissions are direct emissions from sources owned, controlled, and operated within the company, within the operating company, operated within or by the operating company. I have to correct myself there. So what are some examples of this? So for example, if you have a big boiler within your company, there are emissions which are going to result as a result of operating it. So these emissions are categorized as scope 1 emissions. And then you may have company-owned vehicles, of course, which employees may use for their commute to and from the office or for various activities. The emissions which also result from the operation of these cars, that is also classified as scope 1 emissions. And then you may have your innocent microwave, innocent fridge, and also air conditioning equipment, there are also emissions that result from the operation of such machines. So all these are actually taken into account under Scope 1 emissions. So let's look at Scope 2 emissions. So this would be a type of indirect emissions, but these are emissions from the generation of purchased and acquired electricity, steam, heating or cooling consumed by the company. Now, I believe most companies don't produce their own electricity, but they use electricity or other forms of energy. Now, for that energy has been supplied by a company that has done has not created the energy but has generated the energy. So in the generation of this energy, there are emissions that went with it, which you cannot account for as Scope 1 because you are not responsible for these emissions, but you are a consumer of this energy. So this is what we are calling Scope 2 emissions. And then there's a third scope of emissions. These are the hardest to compute. And these are called, they're also a type of indirect emissions, also called value chain emissions, are all other indirect emissions that occur in the company's value chain, including both upstream and downstream activities, where we said upstream activities are all activities before your company, and then downstream will be all activities after your company. So for example, if you're buying laptops, there are emissions that go with the production, the transportation, and everything that goes about the supply chains of these laptops before they get to your company. So all these emissions, how do you account for them? And then if you are a company that manufactures bicycles, for example, those bicycles are going to be used by clients who are the end users. So what emissions are as a result of the use of these bicycles in the market? Those are the downstream activities. And of course, it goes without saying that the manufacture of my bicycles, in this case, this would be accounted as Scope 1 emissions, in that there are emissions during the manufacture of the bicycles. So, for example, when someone takes a bus to work or a train, what emissions are there? So, These Scope 3 emissions are the hardest to abate, and that is why there are 15 categories on how to actually work with them. And I just want to go back to Google and let's look at something here. So let's go back to our GHG protocol. Here it is, and I can go to standards and guidance, and I can go to the Scope 3 standard. So if I go to Scope 3 standard, I see there's corporate value chain Scope 3, etc, and you have your information right here. And then you can see that there are 15. So where is it? Just go right here, and I can go to calculation guidance. And I can see there are 15 categories that help you to just account correctly for all these types of Scope 3 emissions. So again, if you're interested in this kind of reading, you can just go to the GHG protocol, read it for yourself, understand, and see how to make sense of it. So that's all for the Scope 3 emissions. So in terms of the resources that I have used for the presentation of for this presentation, of course, I have to give credit where it's due. I actually did a research using Gemini, so that's Gemini Deep Research, and that's how I landed to some of these resources. Of course, I haven't put everything in here, but you can just go through this resource where you can read ESG definition, 3 pillars and measurement methods. So this is the green scope. You can read all about it here, or you can continue with ESG reporting, your comprehensive guide for 2025. And of course, 2025 was just a few months ago. So you can come read it for yourself just to have a deeper understanding of these things, or you can go to what are the pillars of ESG and just read it for yourself. And then there's a fourth reference, corporate standard frequently asked questions, and this one comes from the GHG protocol, the one that I have just shown. So in terms of what I have studied, in terms of what I used for this presentation, I'm just going to take you to my Gemini produced research. So this is the age of AI, man. So these are the resources. Gemini basically does a research for you and gives you the resources so that you can just go and read for yourself. So there's an entire presentation that has been generated by AI, and you have everything that you need to know for this presentation, or some just for your private consumption. So I will see you in the next video when we will be creating a new test database which we are going to be using in our demonstration and in our classes. See you next time. Take care. Au revoir et à très bientôt.